Hi, this is David Bowles. Welcome to my podcast, Human Meme. I appreciate you being with me. And if you have any thoughts or comments on what you hear today, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can go to my website, bowles.com, BOLES.com, and get in touch with me there. Let me know what you're thinking if you have a response, and I will answer you here. Today we're going to discuss education and the uneven mind. And here are the topics: literacy, racial divide, homeschooling, testing, belonging, values, survival. Literacy. Participation in a democracy requires that people are able to read and understand. They have to read the ballot box, they have to understand, they have to read speeches, they need reading comprehension. In power is reading. Reading is knowing. And sometimes that might reflect a little bit on why education is devalued in some parts of this country, because there are certain people who those in power don't want educated in a proper way. One example in history is Frederick Douglass. He was an abolitionist, a slave, and he understood early on that to be free, a free man, he had to learn how to read. He was working in a shipyard, and he taught himself how to read by deciphering the text printed on bags of flour he was loading as a dock worker. And if he didn't understand a word or how to pronounce it, he would, ask someone, and they would kind of tell him, and from that point he would figure out, well, if that word means that, and this word means this, I can use those terms to figure out the rest of what is being said. Later on, he became a scholar, and he wrote this: "I now understood what had been to me a most perplexing difficulty, to wit, the white man's power to enslave the black man. It was a grand achievement, and I prized it highly. From that moment, I understood the pathway from slavery to freedom. I set out with high hope and a fixed purpose, at whatever cost of trouble, to learn how to read." Now, how many young people have that sort of fire within them, whatever race, color, creed, to read, to know that it is an human imperative to know how to read? As I tell my students, the one thing that can never be taken away from you once you have it is education. In the preamble to our Constitution, "Provide for the public welfare" appears right there in the document that founded us. And that includes education. Now, when you talk about education, access to knowledge and knowing and history and envisioning the future, you have to also discuss a bit of the racial divide. Yes, we have equal access under the law. We have public schools that are disregarded today. It's really unfortunate. I was a child of the public schools. Many people in my family taught in public school. You have private schools that serve the elites, and charter schools that are now wending their way forward, sort of bound to religion, sort of bound to destroying the public school system. And it's something that we have to deal with as not only a country, but as a community. Affirmative action is a sticky topic for many, but I think we need to realize that diversity matters. You need to have all sorts of people in the same classroom, or you're only going to get one point of view supported. You need different experiences, different cultures mixing together, creating thoughts, creating change, creating a new path forward together. And that diversity has now been sealed in a Supreme Court decision, Fisher versus the University of Texas. So does race matter when it comes to teaching the mind? Yes. and we need to deal with it before it deals us down. Homeschooling. I have made money on the homeschooling movement, doing remote teaching of English and American Sign Language, but that still doesn't mean the idea doesn't concern me just a bit, because I find sometimes homeschooled children are insular, and they are raised not with exposure to a lot of different cultures. Are homeschooled children appropriately socialized? Now, generally speaking, probably, and there are lots of examples of successful homeschooled children, but I'm talking not about the successful example, the outlier. I'm talking about the everyday norm. What's going on? What is the universal worldview being taught in these homeschools? Is there sheltered buffet-style learning where we choose this and this and this and we ignore that? It can be a sticky subject. And religiosity in public school or only faith-based learning is something that needs to be also examined. Does God play only in the homeschool, or should God be playing in the public school as well? I believe there's a reason that we have a separation of church and state, and that includes the public school classroom. And where does God fit in the scheme of scientific discovery? These are important questions we have to ask, we have to ponder, we have to try to answer together. Testing. You can't get away from it in the education system. It's how we cleave people from each other. It's how we divide people. It's how we create a bell curve. It's how we say, you're smarter than this other person. And I really am against it. I like people who are self-motivated and learn on their own free will of what needs to be known by them. Now, sometimes you have to say, look, we believe you need to be educated until a certain age just to know certain things, so come to school, sit down and learn. That's important too. But the idea of being gifted in a gifted program, an advanced placement program, if you're a genius or not, a lot of this is decided very early in a child's career in school. And I remember when I was tested in the gifted program, I believe I was in junior high school, maybe 11 years old, in a dark room. It was a storage room with a janitor materials in there. And it smelled awful, and I was there with my tester. And one of the questions I was asked was to name all the uses for a postage stamp. And so, I said, how to mail something to somebody. And then, I was really confused by the question. And then I understood that I could go, what we call today, outside the box. And so I said, well, you could use a postage stamp as a Band-Aid. You could use a postage stamp to wipe your nose. All different kinds of uses for a postage stamp beyond the standard idea. And in the end, I was told that I missed being in the gifted class, which meant many perks, many different benefits, by 1 point. 1 point theoretically separated me from the gifted students to the non-gifted students. I was told at 11 years old, you are not gifted. Now that experience tends to stick to you and stick inside of you, make you a little angry, make you want a little revenge on the system in a positive way, who says that you're not worthy. And I ended up years later writing a play sort of inspired by that moment, called The Weeping Water Cafe. You can read it online at bowls.com, and there's also a videotaped stage version and a videotaped version we shot for television. So you can see how a personal experience becomes a dramatic experience, a cathartic experience. They're all online, bowls.com. I'm also reminded of learning later in life of a third grade student in an elementary school who was told by her music teacher that she had no musical talent. She had no rhythm. She could not play in the school band. And she's in third grade. And when I heard about this, I asked, what? What do you mean? And this was just some ordinary person who just happened to be the musical director, didn't have any musical training. She just kind of, led the band as part of her part-time job. And I thought it was so outrageous that you would tell a person in the third grade that you can't be a musician. You just don't have it in you. Your life's over. You are not gifted musically. Now, I asked that person because I happened to be in the same room, and I got a little loud, saying, so she can't, bang a drum, she can't play the triangle, she can't shake a rattle. There's nothing possible that she could do to be included in the band because you think she's non-musical. And in the Midwest, when you ask a question like that, you're in trouble because you don't ask questions like that in the Midwest. And I was basically told, yeah, that's it. She's out. She's not going to do it. I couldn't believe it. I told them I thought that was the wrong decision and a cruel way to make a point. And I also said that it was outrageous to so meanly end an interest that this young child had in music, obviously, or the child would not have been trying to get into the band. There was something there that made her want to participate. So, what do we do with different thinkers? How do we build a system that can include them without realizing that they're there? Who sees genius? Now, it takes a very special person to recognize talent. As my mentor Howard Stein would say, and we'll visit him later in this podcast, virtually because he's dead at 91, but he will still inspire us, I promise. Howard Stein would say genius recognizes genius. And if you think about that, it's quite wonderful, but also quite sad. Because how many geniuses do we have, and how many geniuses do we really have working in the school system? Testing only evaluates what we already know. How many students in standardized testing and evaluation are thought of in the wrong way because the ways of their knowing are unknown to the tester? How is genius discovered if the person who is doing the evaluating is not a genius and cannot see the light and does not recognize the depths? How many people have we lost to a school system that is born and created to keep people in the middle, to keep people in line, to keep people obeying? Belonging, really important part of education. One of the great things about public schools and a big university compared to homeschool is you have a big group of people who are all together with this same driving energy that I want to know something. I'm here because I need to know what I do not know. There is a shared suffering in the experience, especially if you fail a test or you don't do well in class or your teacher doesn't like you. You also have an alma mater, that when you're done learning, you still have a touchstone to the past where you can reconnect, learn, and fuel your future learning based on your past experience. Alumni is binding, and that's why these schools go after them so voraciously, because they are the people that the institution serves. Values. What we decide to covet together and protect and have dominion over in all aspects, that defines us. What we value, what we choose to say, this is more important than this. New things have value. The scientific process has great value. Logic is very valuable, and logic can be learned. It can be taught. Taste and talent are inborn. You either have it or you don't have it. Logic, every mind is available for logical thought. Our values are confirmed with new thoughts connecting to old, proven tendrils of knowledge and theory shine in the dark when we know where to look for them. Finally, we'll discuss survival. Can and should the university survive? We are quickly on the way to, at the elite schools, the private schools, colleges, to $100,000 a year tuition, room, and board. Now, who can afford a $400,000 education? The rich, the wealthy, the connected, the super smart who will be on full scholarship. But what about everybody else? What about the smart student who wants to go to a good school but can't afford a $400,000 education? And these private schools, they make their money on tuition, so they do not like to give free rides. They don't like to give a lot of scholarships. They need that tuition money to keep running. So what do? You turn to the student loan system. And there are people arguing today that student loans are a choice. I say they are not a choice. They have now become, because of the rising cost of higher education, a necessity. You cannot play if you will not pay. That is the meat of it. Why should smart students be regulated to a cheap community college or a state school just because they can't afford the tuition at an elite school? There has to be a better way. We need to find it together. We cannot punish the mind because of the pocketbook. We cannot put people into indentured slavery because they can't pay their student loans when they graduate. Now, I tell some students who are in this situation, who maybe don't have a lot of money, come from a middle-class family, they're struggling, I say, if your plan is to go on to graduate school, find an excellent undergraduate school that is very cheap that you can afford and blow all of your money, all of your loan money on your graduate teaching, because it's your last degree that stays with you as you move throughout the world. I had a student who came to me and said she was leaving the state school and going to an East Coast elite school for her final year so she could have her degree from the elite school and not the undergraduate school, the college school. And I asked, I said, do you plan to get an advanced degree? And she said, I don't know, maybe. I said, well, in the field you're in, you're going to want to get an advanced degree above a BA, so why go spend $75,000 in your final year at an elite school when the school you're in is perfectly wonderful? And she said, I need the name. If I'm going to get into an elite graduate school program, I got to have the name of the elite school behind me. And she said, if I can't afford to go to graduate school, then I'm ending with this elite school behind me. I want to belong. I want to be part of the alumni association of the elite school and not the state school. So while I understand her reasoning, I don't think functionally her choice was very wise, because I know she's going to go on to graduate school and she's going to enter $75,000 in debt because of the last year of her private school teaching. And that's a sad thing. She wants the reputation, she wants the learning, but she can't afford it. And so she goes into debt in her final year of school. So the university, we need to realize, is owned and operated by the business school, because the business school has the most money, the most donations, and they have the most students. The biggest program has the biggest say. And after that, probably the law school, just because they believe they are the intellectual center of any school. The arts, not important to the university, or the humanities, because there's really no money in them. There's no return in the student. Theater students, writing students tend not to give back to their school. The business guys and women, when they leave, they give a lot of money back. So there isn't enough value in the arts for the coalition of the wealthy to be counted. And we're talking about elite schools and private colleges. I just want to have a little side note here that craftsmen are necessary. People who work with their hands, people who have no interest in higher education, people who make things, who build things. They are just as important and just as valuable as the rest of us. They're doing a little work outside, so if you hear a saw, it's not me. It's a craftsman. So the way of working is your private worldview into something what we'll call memeable. Now, in final closing, I'm going to share with you the story of Howard Stein. 91 years old, he died, heart condition, but during his life he was a student of the mind in the best possible way. He taught at Yale, he taught at Iowa. He sort of was around during the formation of the Yale Mafia in the Yale School of Drama. And if you don't know what the Yale Mafia is or was, I can't tell you because it's a very dangerous thing. Just kidding. It was a group of students who graduated from Yale. They all moved to New York City. They all worked together. They all gave each other jobs and created this kind of synthetic circle that became very successful. So they call it the Yale Mafia. We help our own. We help each other. And he ended his teaching career at Columbia University in the city of New York, where I grew to meet and know and love him. Now, Howard was a very unique person, undefeatable. He had one eye, lost the eyesight in a brain surgery, one kidney, lost to cancer, one ear, hearing in one ear due to the same brain surgery. He had trench foot and a failing heart. He leapt from the continent in World War II to save his nation. And at the end of his life, he was in physical rehab for an ailing shoulder and kind of the rest of his body. And his physical therapist told him he was a terrific student. And Howard said, "Why? What do you mean? Student? What do you mean?" Because Howard, for 50 years, was the teacher. And the therapist said, "Well, you learned so well. Never stop learning." And Howard laughed and giggled, and he was so delighted by that small compliment that meant something larger to him, that even after all of his years, at 91 years old, he was still able to learn something new and appreciate it and to practice it and to put it to work in his own life. And that is education. It's not one thing, it's a million different things. It's not one day in your life, it's all of your life. As you move through your life, bring what you know, leave behind what you never knew. Thank you for listening. Be a human meme.